Welcome back to part 3 of Spoils of War. I hope that you are enjoying this story. Let us continue to see where it may lead us today.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. I already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long. And now you're gone. Took me away from all of my fears. Kept me away from all of my tears. Now you're gone. And now I'm
The wicked wind whipped across the window pane as Pa Kou stood there watching the angry rain spit across the land. It was mid-afternoon, and it had come so suddenly that she had to stop and watch its anger. The tree swayed from left to right as if blocking the rain from hitting its leaves, which appeared to be fragile and lost. She raised one hand and placed it on the glass, feeling its coolness against her warm hand. A car pulled up, and she saw Gushing run out and toward the house, and within moments her daughter was inside, shaking the rain off her jacket and wiping her wet shoes against the old worn welcome rug. "Mom?" she called out. "In here," she whispered. Gushing entered, and Pa Kou turned to look at her daughter, who looked like a drowned rat from the rain. Her black hair was wet against her soft oval face, and her dark eyes were rimmed with a softness that made her smile. "Where is your son?" "At his grandma's house, eating cookies and being naughty as a 2-year-old would do," she said, smiling. She walked across the room and embraced her. "How are you feeling?" Pa Kou let out a breath and pulled away from the hug. "I'm good." "Can we talk?" Pa Kou stared at her daughter's young face and for the first time noticed the lines that grazed across her. It wasn't too long ago that she once looked in the mirror and saw herself as this young and this free. But today, at this moment, her daughter's eyes held a certain sadness that made her heart sink. She reached out and held her hands. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Pa Kou asked. Gushing shrugged her thin shoulders and walked to sit down on the couch. She looked like a teenager caught smoking as she sat there, with her shoulders slouched against her body, her head bent, and her hair covering her face. "Tell me," Pa Kou said as she walked to sit down beside her. Gusheng lifted her eyes and stared at her. When you were with Dad, was there ever a time where you felt that you made a mistake? What is this about, really?" Gusheng took a deep breath, and Pa Kou realized her hands were shaking. She reached over and took her daughter's hands in hers and forced her to look up, and when she did, the tears that threatened to fall were now clinging down to her cheeks. She reached over and wiped away her tears. "Are you unhappy with Tom?" She sobbed, and then she nodded slowly. "I am. I hate to say it that way. It makes me sound so cruel. But when I wake up in the morning, the only thing that lingers in my mind is freedom." "Does he know you feel this way?" "No. That's just the thing, Mom. He loves me. In his own way, but I... She left the sentence trailing. Pa Kou watched as her daughter's sad face tightened with more emotion. "But it's not enough for you." Her daughter nodded and began crying. "I feel horrible." She turned her daughter's face toward her and cupped her chin. "You deserve to be loved in every way that a person can be loved. You deserve it. You've earned it, Gosheng. What you need to do now is talk to Tong and tell him how you feel." She wiped her eyes and lowered her face. When I read the letter that Dad wrote you, I felt so robbed. I have never felt that with anyone, especially not with Tong. In his own way, he may feel that, but I've yet to receive it. Does this make me a bad person? No, honey. It makes you human. There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel loved. I urge you, talk to your husband. Gosheng entered her bedroom as her husband Tong was putting their son Brandon down for bed. She stood there and waited until he turned around before she walked in. He smiled at her, and she forced one in return as she walked to sit down on the bed, thoughts of her mother's words lingering in the back of her mind. She looked up as he walked to reach for a book on the shelf, and she stopped him. He turned to look at her with soft eyes. I need to talk to you, she whispered. Smiling, he replied, Sure, what's wrong? She waited until he sat down beside her, and then she gathered her thoughts. What do you think of our life? Tong frowned, but then softened his look as he shrugged. I think it's wonderful. Do you ever want more? Perhaps in the future, but right now I have what I want. And then he paused. Are you happy with me? Tears filled her eyes as she got up from where she sat and walked to the door. She took a deep breath and then turned around to face him. Tong, I love you. I do. But when I sit here and I think about our life, I'm I find myself wanting more than what I have. Not in my life, but from you. He stood up, his face written with concern and confusion. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed deeply. What do you mean? Are you saying that you are unhappy with me? She sobbed. I'm not sure how to word this so that you won't get hurt. We'll try, he said sternly as he looked at her. She nodded and swallowed back her tears. I want you to love me like I'm the last person on earth. I haven't felt like that. I haven't felt like I'm the only one you want for a long time. When we are together, it feels like you're here with me because you have to be, not because you want to. I wake up during the night and you're either sleeping on the couch or fast asleep at your desk. I need you to want me like you can't live without me. I haven't felt that from you in a long time, and I'm afraid that because I'm human, my mind is slipping me slowly into insanity if you don't make me feel that way soon. Tong stood there with his hands clamped at his sides, his lips stern and his eyes wide open. She watched as his face danced several unexplainable expressions, and then he simply sat down on the bed and hung his head down low. Goshen watched as he rubbed his face several times before finally looking up at her. I didn't know that was how you felt about me, he whispered. Why didn't you say anything? She walked to kneel before him. I was afraid of how you would feel. I didn't want you to feel like you didn't love me. But what you just said to me, it means that I don't love you. No, at least not enough, right? He interrupted. Is it that hard to accept that I want more love? Tong reached for her and cupped her face. I'm sorry if I made you feel that way. I love you, Gosheng, more than anything in this whole world. You are the light in my life. Every day when I wake up, you're the first thing I think of and the last person in my mind before I sleep. But sometimes I become lost in the many things of the world and I forget that you need some passion for me. I thought that as long as I stuck around, it meant something. It does mean something. But sometimes I need to hear it from you, and I need to feel it from you, she said. He smiled. Can we try again?
I don't know if I can make it when I walk alone. Can somebody come and save me? I just wanna know. I wanna know. If I could run through the fire, I could conquer the night. If I can make it, if I try to draw the red lights. I don't know if I can make it when I walk alone.
1954. The night was quiet as the two lovers lay in a bed of banana leaves down by the river. the moon as their only witness to their lovemaking. The crickets played them a song that was harmonious to their love. Maynard felt his hands on her thighs, tracing every exposed skin as his lips captured hers again. When he lifted himself from her, the moonlight gave her a look into his handsome face. He reached up and pulled him down for a kiss, and when she opened up for him, and he gave her his life, she breathed for the first time, allowing his love to save her tortured soul. She laid in his arms afterward, and felt his heart beating against her palm. The sweat had been blown dry from the small breeze blowing across the river. She drummed her fingers against his chest and smiled when he laughed when she hit a sensitive spot. "You are my first," she whispered. Pao kissed her head and wrapped his arms around her. "As you are mine, Mena. I will always remember this moment. Forever." She looked up at him and smiled. "Do you promise me that?" "Yes." She smiled and laid her head down against his chest, listening to the sound of his heart beating against her ear, its rhythm sending her into a deep sleep. And for the first time since the loss of her family, she was able to sleep soundly and peacefully. In his arms, she felt safe and free from all the violence around her. When she woke in his arms, she felt refreshed as she yawned and pushed herself up. She reached for her clothes and dressed as he lay sleeping. She walked to the river and washed her face and hair, and then drank some to fill her thirst. When she walked back to where they slept, Pao was already up and dressed. "Mekong River is about a few miles from here. If we hurry, we might make it today," he said. Mayna nodded, and then she realized something she'd never thought before. She turned to find him loading bullets into the rifle, and she felt a strong loss coming into her heart. "What happens after we reach Thailand? Will you leave me?" Pao looked up at her and put his rifle aside. He walked to her and took her hands. "No, I'm going to make you my wife." They walked on that afternoon through the heat, making their way through the jungle. The sun was shining down intensely with added hate for them, it seemed. And when they thought they'd never reach it, they came across the river that separated life and death. It was wide, long, and full of whirls that could swallow them up whole. Mayna stared at the river, and inside she felt her stomach turning. Would they make it across the river? She reached for his hand and held it, feeling his hand shake with fear. She turned to look at him with tears in her eyes. "Are we really here? After such a long and tragic journey, are we really standing here, before the river that decides our fate?" she asked. Pal looked at her, and then reached out a hand to caress her face. She sobbed, and then wrapped her arms around him, his scent filling her nostrils, giving her life. And when he pulled away, he bent down and gave her a soft kiss. "I love you, Nena, I always will. This river, it doesn't decide our fate. We decide our own fate. It wasn't the freedom in my heart that kept me alive when I was running for my life. It was you. One look at you and everything in my world came together, like a perfectly fitted jigsaw puzzle." Mena smiled through her tears and a laugh bubbled out her lips. "I'm worried you're speaking of goodbyes already." "No, never." "Then kiss me." And he did. The softest, most gentle kiss she could ever feel in her whole life. There, on that river, standing between the run for freedom and the path to life, he gave her a breath of life that pieced together all of her wounds, healed her hurt, and wiped away her tears. When she pulled away from him, she was breathing hard, as if she had been running for miles. She reached up and touched his cheek, his skin in her hands, his body molded into hers. They stood like that for a long time, forgetting the world around them, pushing all the violence in the world away and only letting their love stand before them. "I've never loved a woman before, Mena. I never knew that love like this could exist. I never knew that loving a woman like you could make me feel so alive because right now I've learned to take my very first breath. All of my life I've never breathed like this before, and it feels wonderful to be able to do so for the first time with you," Pao said in a soft whisper. Smiling, she replied, "I didn't know love could be like this too. I've only heard of talk, but never did I think that I would be the one to feel it." She pulled him in for a hug, And that was when she saw the soldier hiding in the bushes with a gun. Her body stiffened, and as he raised the gun to shoot, she gasped and swung Pao around so her body would protect him. But when Pao turned and saw the gunman, he pushed her into the water. The blow of the river hitting her body entered her like 1,000 needles, poking her as she gasped for breath and pushed herself out of the water, only to be pulled back down again. She heard a gunshot and then saw Pao's body fly into the water. She screamed out his name but was silenced by the roar of the river's angry whirls. She tried to swim, but the waves took her away and she realized if she didn't try, she would be pushed somewhere else. So she started kicking her legs, and as her tired body began moving across the river, she turned back around and saw the exact spot where she had stood just moments before with Pao in her arms. Maynard reached the other side of the river by early evening. Her strength drained as she lay down on the ground and stared at the angry river before her. She couldn't erase Pao's body flying into the river from her mind. Was he alive? Was he dead? Did he make it across? She started sobbing as thunder roared above her and the sky darkened completely. She pushed herself up when she heard a twig snap. Her head swung around and her eyes scanned the area, afraid of the worst. She slowly started backing toward the trees, her eyes watching for any movement. She pushed herself back into the hidden forest and hid under the bushes. Laughter filled her ears as 4 young men and women entered when rain started falling. They played in the water and then talked quietly together before walking away. Mena sighed deeply as she closed her eyes, hunger hitting her. She looked around as rain started coming down hard. She got up and started pushing her way through the forest, her legs and arms tired from swimming for so long. The world around her had darkened completely now and she was exhausted, but hunger kept her awake. She came across a small opening and saw a fire that had been put out not too long ago. She saw some thin blankets lying around and grabbed one to pull it close to her body. Leftover burnt rice was lying on the ground and she grabbed a handful of it, shoving it into her mouth. The food was heaven. The taste buds ignored the burnt staleness, and the nostrils ignored the smell. When she had finished, she tore off some banana leaves and covered her head as she lay down to sleep. Maina awoke to the thunder's angry yell and jerked awake in the dark. She was thirsty. She got up, walked to the branches on the leaves, and tore one off. She caught the trickle of the rain from the other leaves and drank it, cold water filling her senses alive as she felt her way back to the bed. She lay there and thought of how, as tears filled her eyes. She wrapped the thin blanket around her body and listened to the sound of the rain splattering on the leaves, the sound of the thunder roaring, and the crickets singing. Then, as if on cue, her sobs grew to match that of the thunder. When she found herself sobbing, she couldn't stop it. She cried. She cried for his loss, for hers, and the love she would never feel ever again. And then somewhere in the dark, she heard him call out her name. She sat up, the banana leaves destroyed from the tree branches as she listened. Through the rain and thunder, she listened, and then she heard it again, a little closer and louder now. She gasped and stood up, running toward the sound of his voice. "Pao!" she cried out. Her heart was pounding as she ran, her hope rising, and at the same time wondering if she was dreaming. A flash of lightning sparked, and she saw him standing before her, drenched in blood, mud, and sand. He was breathing hard as he held his right shoulder, which leaked of blood. Mayna couldn't believe her eyes as she stood there frozen in the rain, staring at him. And then with a sob she ran and threw her arms around him, hugging him, holding him for dear life. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his ear. He pulled away and cupped her face. "Never, my love. You would never lose me." They kissed in the rain, their passion blowing sparks as the thunder roared above them. She pulled away and led him back to where she had been earlier. She pulled out some more banana leaves and made a longer and thicker roof above them, and then pulled him to sit down as she removed his shirt. "I saw your body fly into the river. I didn't know what to think," she said. "I'm strong. I will survive. But now I fear I'm losing blood and getting weak." Maynard tore off the thin blanket and used it to wash off the blood from his shoulder, and then another piece to wrap the wound up. She caressed his face as he lay in her arms. "I love you, Pao. present. Pa Kou stared at the fresh dirt, and tears filled her eyes. She placed a single white rose on top of it and knelt down, her tears already dripping down. She removed a tissue from her pocket and wiped her cheeks, her vocal cords shutting down. She reached her hand and touched the dirt as her sobs became louder. Nepal, do you know that I think of you every hour of every day? When I look at the house, everywhere I see, it's you. When I'm in the kitchen cooking and I hear a song in my mind, it's you who is singing it. When I'm in the living room and a commercial comes on with a voice, it's your voice I hear. You are all around me, and it seems like I can't find any strength to move on from this phase of my life. You're impossible to get over. She sniffed, her hands starting to get cold from the wind, but she didn't care. She needed, no, she wanted to stay here as long as possible. She reached out and drew her heart in the dirt, her tears already dripping again. You gave me everything in my whole life, Nopal. I have so much yet to give you, and you can't be here to receive it. I know that the more days I get to spend with you, the more I'd want. I'm sorry if I'm greedy when it comes to you, but with you, your love, it has given me a brand new life. How can I go on when the one person I love isn't here to share his day with me anymore? I miss your smile, your jokes, and your touch. I sleep at night in a big bed that can't be filled with warmth, and all I do is think of you. When will it won't hurt so much? Mom? Pa Kou turned around and saw Lee walking toward her. Her daughter's face was already broken in tears as she reached her and knelt down. Pa Kou reached over and held her hands tight. They both knelt there staring at the fresh dirt that held the one man who gave them a reason to live. Both were crying, their sobs quietly revealing their own pain. I had a dream about Dad last night, Lee said after a moment. Pa Kou turned to look at her and wiped her eyes. You did? What was it about? Let's go for a walk. I'll tell you more about it. The St. Anthony Bridge was quiet today, as both mother and daughter walked along the bridge, admiring the stillness for once. The atmosphere looked kind of ghastly as they walked on, once in a while meeting a jogger or biker. The river slowly flowed below them as they stuck their hands in their pockets and walked in silence. What was Dad like when he was young? Lee asked. Pa Kou smiled and took a deep breath, memories filling her mind. God, he was so rebellious in his own way. He used to break one of my rules just to see what I would do to him. Lee giggled. He has such a life force inside of him, Pa Kou continued. He lived most of his days in harmony, and never once did he ever associate it with anger or resentment. He just had so much love to give to everyone. When you were born, he printed out these flyers of you with your name, date of birth, how much you weighed, and what time you came to the world. I was at home with you, and he went to my parents' house and passed them all out to my cousins. Lee's eyes filled up with tears as she listened. That sounds like something he would do. Oh, yes, and everyone was just shocked at this jolly man who had received a daughter from God, and no one had ever seen a man as happy as that. Some even said no one has seen one as happy as that since your father died. Lee reached over and held her hand as they walked on. It was early this morning when he came into my dreams. I was walking across a field of rice. The wind was soft, yet it was able to sway all the stalks. He was cutting the rice and had a bamboo basket on his back, and I didn't recognize him at first because he was so different in his monk clothes, and his youth was just glowing on his face. But then as I got closer and I saw his movement, I knew he was my dad. I walked to him and I hugged him, crying and begging him to come back. He simply handed me the bamboo basket off his back and said he was waiting for all of us. He built us a house on top of the mountains where no one could ever hurt us. It is surrounded by flowing honey and milk, rivers that never go dry, and a field of rice as far as the eye could see. He had been building it for several months now and had just finished. Pa Kou held her sobs as she tightened her hand around her daughter's. Did he take you to go see it? She nodded and stopped walking. She walked to place her hands on the railings and wiped her eyes. He did. It was so beautiful, Mother. I never knew such a place like that existed. It looked so peaceful and so free, like nothing could ever hurt you. Pa Kou smiled. A place like that could only exist in the afterlife. He's waiting for all of us, Mother. He's there, and he wanted me to tell you that he hears you when you call for him. If you're ever lonely, you just call his name and he'll come and he'll hold you through the night. Gosheng looked up from where she sat on the bench as her sister walked from the car. She adjusted her position as her sister came to give her a hug and then sat down. Her sister's hair was tied up in a tight bun, giving her that stern lawyer look. She tucked the loose strand of her hair behind her ear and smiled. Thanks for coming to meet me today, Gosheng said. Smiling, Lee replied, Sure. Is everything okay? It is. I just wanted to talk to you about something. Lee's face paled. What is it? You're scaring me. Gosheng sighed, and then she removed a letter from her pocket and held it in her hands. She stared at it for a long while before she lifted her eyes up to meet her sister's. I got a letter from Dad today. At first I thought it was a joke or something, but then I read it and I realized it really was from him. Lee stared at the letter and then grabbed it from her. Are you serious? Yeah. She took the letter back from her sister's hand and opened it up. The black ink scrawled across the paper made her heart sink. The writing was written in her father's hand, and there were moments where he must have been tired and stopped, for the writing looked to be jagged. She sighed and turned the letter to Lee. Here, read it. Gosheng, in this dark hospital room, I'm writing my last words to you. There are a lot of things I've yet to say to you, but as I've watched you grow up, I've come to realize that you are already there. There is so much life inside of you, and when I look at you, I see a side of me that I've never seen before. You are the spirit that matches me in this race of life. When you grow older and become the last faded image in a person's mind, you learn to appreciate the life around you. Those precious moments that were once lost could be found again in a blink of an eye, if you try hard enough. But with you, I never have to worry because you carry everything with you. And I envy you for that, for you have found memories that I once lost a long time ago. Never lose that gift, my daughter, for it comes in handy at a time of need. This hospital room reminds me of the last goodbye said between two people. You sit here and you wonder, how many people have said their last farewells in here? Goodbyes are always sad, but they are never the ending. They are the beginning of a new afterlife. We will meet again, Gosheng. You and I will meet again. And I will sing to you like I once did. Do you remember when you were about 6 years old and I took you to watch the seagulls on the beach? You were so amazed at these creatures and you told me that you wanted to be just like that, to be free and to fly off into a world of the unknown. I believe death is like that, free and flying off into the unknown. I will be here waiting for you, and one day when you arrive again, I'll take you to watch those seagulls. And this time, we'll have those creatures envy us for finding something they thought we never could find. Love, your father, Nutball. The letter dropped from Lee's hands, and Gosheng caught it just before it hit the ground. She turned to look at her sister's torn face as she folded the letter back up and placed it back into the envelope. She reached over and held Lee's hand. Her sister turned around and stared at her with teary eyes and trembling lips. Gosheng reached over and held her sister in her arms as the sobs poured out of her. Oh, God, how he must have felt sitting in that hospital room writing to you, Lee cried. Gosheng pulled away and wiped Lee's eyes. I think he sent all of us a letter. Mom's was the first, but it's coming to all of us now. When you get home, check your mailbox and let me know. Dear Lee, what words can I use to describe you? You can't be described in words, for you are so special beyond anything in this world. You are my addiction in this life. because you have shown me that life doesn't end after you turn 30. You've shown me that life can go beyond that and more if you look out for the sun and a smile. You're my secret treasure in this life. I hate to speak these last words through a letter to you, but I'm afraid time won't let me do it any other way. In life, there are so many paths to choose, and if you're not careful and choose the wrong one, in one blink of an eye, your whole purpose will be lost. Don't let that happen to you. You're too precious to lose your way. People would benefit from you, and if you became lost, what would that show to others who are not even remotely close to your faith? It's getting darker now and colder as I sit here. My strength is draining, but I feel I have to say this to you. I can't leave without saying this to you. The very first time I laid eyes on you, as you were put on your mother's belly right after delivery, you looked up at me and a smile graced your face. I knew right then and there that you were going to be special. You weren't afraid of anything and everything is possible to you. Never lose this gift, because when you do, you will no longer have that spark in life. You will never have that faith to push yourself to go further. Don't let greed take over you, for it is a poison that infects you and there is no cure. Never forget that. Love, your father. Dear Kehm, what is a man's purpose in life? A man's purpose in life is to love a woman with all of his heart and to never let her feel empty. Every day when you wake up next to your wife, never forget to tell her how beautiful she is and how much she means to you. Although the world is kind, it can also be very cruel. It can take you away from those you love and leave you with just memories. When that day comes, you want to make sure that you gave all you had to everyone who loved you. My son, when you came into my life, I became more of a man than I ever realized. With every step you learned to take, it gave me a bigger vision to dare to dream and to dare to achieve. One day when you have a child, you will look into that child's eyes and you will see me smiling through him. I will be here with you always, no matter where or what you do. Keep your heart open and allow me to live with you, to share with you all of my wisdom and my secrets to life. I will be there for you. Death is a time race, I'm afraid, and right now I'm losing. But I won't be gone for too long. Soon, when your purpose has been fulfilled, you will join me as well, and we can start a relationship. Remember that I live in you, and when you do the rational things, I'm there. When you do the impossible, it is me who is guiding you to the stars and back. Never forget that you and I are one. Love, your father. Dear Chu, do you remember when you were young, you once asked me what death was going to be like? I responded by saying that death was like sand in an hourglass, and we were racing for our purpose in life. That statement hasn't changed. As I sit here, facing the last hours of my life, I can safely say that it has been a wonderful one. You were part of it, and you gave me a reason to look forward to the light even when the days were dark. You are such a brilliant child, and you gave me something in return for being your father. You gave me a second chance at becoming someone better. When I'm gone, take a look at my pictures, and you'll see that I still exist in those frozen moments. I am never really gone. I've just gone on to a place where we all go when our sand runs out, and there I will be waiting for you. But for now, take those frozen memories with you wherever you go, and don't forget that I'm always here for you. There's nothing in my life that I regret, and you shouldn't regret anything either. When it rains across the earth, it will be my gift for your lands and your grass. When the sun shines, it will be my love for you. Don't become a silent man just because you lose someone in your life. Don't give someone a reason to hate you because you feel a little bit unsure of your feelings. Love. And love more than you can give, because in the end, love is all that matters. Never judge a person until you know them, because they might surprise you in the end. Always look onto others as a chance to improve yourself, and never forget that by letting education into your life, you climb higher than you ever expect to. Love, your father. Pa Kou stared at the letters in front of her, and tears filled her eyes. Her fingers brushed against the writing on the letters, and she sniffed, drops of tears staining her fingers. She looked up at her 4 children standing before her, and walked up to hold each one of them, afraid of letting go, for fear that they would vanish as well as her husband. And when she pulled away, she took a deep breath. I knew that he had been writing you letters, but I never got to read them. He wanted it to be a surprise for you guys. He said it was his last chance to say his goodbye. This was his way of showing love for all of you, she said. I wish I'd known that he was doing this for us. I think it would have been nice to see him write this, Chu said with teary eyes. Pa Kou smiled and touched his face. Don't we all wish we could have seen him? He was so secretive about this part. He asked me to leave. He wanted his own mind clear of things so he could write to you, all about his feelings of life and love. She handed the letters back to them. Take care of these. These are the last messages from your father. Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 4 will be out shortly.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. You already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long.